One night, in the middle of the night, the church bell started ringing. People fired their shotguns. Everybody was awake, and they knew that there was something wrong in the community and they needed help. So my father and my brother and I went out there, and we started sacking up dirt and filling up this and building up this levee. We knew we couldn't hold the water back.
Probably the most clear item in my mind was the roar of the water when my mother and dad got all the children up to start dressing, and my mother started putting clothes in pillowcases in case we did have to evacuate. But with the roar of the water coming on, they pretty well knew.
The Coast Guard was evacuating people with a boat named Shark River. We flagged it down and it stopped. And it had a capacity of 18, but we were numbered 23 and 24 on the boat. And it had very little left above water. But it took us to the high ground at Mansoura. And as we went down the bayou, there were a lot of people on the levees waving and trying to get the boat to stop. But of course, it was at capacity, over capacity really, and they couldn't stop.
The flood of 1927 was the greatest natural disaster the country had ever suffered, leaving nearly 1 million Americans homeless. Of those, the largest portion lived in Louisiana, approximately 200,000 people. Storm after storm dumped record levels of precipitation on the central United States, swelling the Mississippi River and all its tributaries until finally the levees began to burst.
You could draw a line from Pine Bluff, Arkansas, due south to the Gulf of Mexico. And all of that area, as far as the river, and in many cases on the east bank of the river as well, was underwater. At its widest, the river covered over 100 miles in width. So it was a true inland sea.
It ended up that you could get in a boat and go to Vicksburg, or you could go to Monroe, anywhere you wanted to go east of there by boat.
Thousands scrambled in vain to shore up the crumbling levees, including hundreds of prisoners and black Louisianians who were forced to work in deadly conditions along the river. The part of the state hit hardest was the French-speaking region of Acadiana. Downriver in New Orleans, nearly 15 inches of rain fell on Good Friday of that year.
The greater the flood, ironically, the safer New Orleans was going to be. And the reason was that in a truly great flood, there was no possibility that the levees far upriver from New Orleans were going to hold the water in. And when those levees broke, the water was going to flow out of the river. It would inundate Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, and much of Louisiana, but the water would never get to New Orleans.
To the wealthy elite who controlled the city, the real danger was not floodwaters, but fear. New Orleans was the economic capital of the South and an important center of international banking. But the banks were emptying fast, as northern investors scrambled to move their money out of Louisiana and up to higher ground.
As this rain is falling, pouring out of the sky, the leading bankers of the city are meeting, and they decide that they're going to use all their power, political and otherwise, to dynamite the levee downriver.
It would take 80,000 pounds of dynamite to open a crevasse in the levee at Carnarvon, 13 miles downriver from Canal Street. The Mississippi washed through at a rate 20% greater than Niagara Falls. The farmers, fishermen, and fur trappers living in rural St. Bernard and Plaquemines parishes were evacuated, but their homes and businesses were utterly wiped out. Most received no real compensation. The devastation following the flood was staggering, but it could have been even worse. In the first federally assisted disaster relief, the American Red Cross constructed massive refugee camps, saving many Louisianians from certain starvation.
The Red Cross set up tents for each of the families, and they had mess tents where people went to eat. Nowadays, I'm sure there would be plenty of complaints about conditions, but they were just happy to be somewhere and have some food and shelter.
The Great Flood of 1927 brought changes to Louisiana that would last long after the waters receded. For many people in the isolated region of Acadiana, the Red Cross refugee workers were their first contact with modern America. In one encounter, the wife of a relief official who had opened his home to a refugee family asked the mother to turn the lights off before she went to sleep.
The next morning she got up and found that the lights were still on. And so Mrs. Stephen asked the woman, "Why didn't you turn off the lights like I asked?" And the woman responded, "Well, I blew and blew and blew, but I never could get the light to go out." It was the first time she'd seen a light bulb.
Along with the torrent of American technology and culture, tremendous political changes were on the rise in Louisiana as well. Ruined by the flood, many farmers, sharecroppers, and small-town merchants looked to state leaders for help, but nobody bothered to reach out to them, except for